your gauge or something, but
Yeah.
you can find that. We're just encouraging you to do that because it's good for wildlife, and that's where we come in. So,
Yeah, I mean, I do it just because I trust science.
shocking. All right.
What is this?
The jury is still out on science, as they say.
All right. So I'm gonna do a little bit of silence, and then I'll just start like we're recording
Yep.
podcast. Welcome to the National Wildlife Federation Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Drew Youngdyke. We have a couple great guests today. We have Mahting Putelis, owner of Hunt to Eat. And we also have Nicole Quartieri. Quartieri. Oh, I always get that wrong.
That's all right.
The editor for Hunting and Fishing for Gear Junkie. And what we're going to talk about today is non-lead options for hunting and fishing. And we're not going to preach to you. It's just not what we're doing right now with this issue, but we are just going to talk about a new collaboration with Hunt to Eat and the National Wildlife Federation to encourage its use and why it's good for wildlife. And we'll also dive into lots of other issues just about hunting and fishing, because I get the opportunity to talk with two pretty experienced hunters and anglers, which is exciting. So Mahting, Hunt to Eat. Before we dive into the specific collaboration with National Wildlife Federation, I want folks that don't already know to know what Hunt to Eat is. So where did this idea come, and where do you see it going in the future? And actually, just what is it?
What is it? So Hunt to Eat is an apparel company. We started out 6 years ago now, essentially wanting to just have a cool t-shirt that represented the lifestyle that we live, and unfortunately I don't think there were too many of them out there. We weren't into what was being sold at big box stores, so we started with that, and 6 years later we are trying to bring together a community of folks that love being outside, that love to hunt and fish, and want to be representative of a larger community, an inclusive community, and speak up for wild places and wild animals. So still making rad shirts, and hopefully have a message behind them that promotes conservation. So
that's terrific. And I have my Michigan Hunt to Eat t-shirt, which I am so excited. It's my favorite colors, orange and blue, which are my high school football colors, of course. and it's my two of my favorite species.
And the Denver Broncos.
Sure, that too. People in Michigan totally care about that. But it's two of my favorite species to hunt and eat, which is deer and squirrels too. So
there you go.
You'll be excited about a new fall release we have coming for
All
squirrels.
Right.
And you guys look adorable in your matching Hunt to Eat hats.
Thank you. Drew does have the old one, which is no longer available, but the whole new hat lineup is out just recently. So.
And I was there for the birth of Hunt to Eat.
You were?
Yeah.
Where do you say the birth of Hunt to Eat was?
Between you and Yanni.
Oh, yeah.
Initially.
Yeah.
Back then.
Back then.
Back in the day.
And I think this is a good time to introduce then Nicole too. Nicole is the editor of hunting and fishing issues for Gear Junkie.
Yeah.
Yep. And Nicole has an extensive history with communications in the outdoor industry. Nicole, could you tell people kind of your background in hunting and how you came to your current position?
Yeah, sure. It actually started with, for me, hunting started with outdoor recreation. So I moved to Montana 7 years ago from Colorado, where I worked in the software industry and lived downtown and had a very urban life, and moved to Bozeman and really got introduced to another level of the outdoors. So began hiking, backpacking. I did about 150 miles on the Continental Divide Trail by myself, and while I was out there, had all these really incredible experiences with wildlife. And within those experiences, I spent a lot of time on the trail by myself thinking, and I came out of that experience wanting to be a hunter, because I figured if anyone had the type of experiences that I had with wildlife, hunting would probably grant me a chance to really experience behavior and landscape in ways that I hadn't before. And kind of by accident, I got a job for the production company ZPZ, which produced Meat Eater, back then, and I actually got that job on Craigslist, so I had no intention of getting into the hunting world other than wanting to learn how to hunt on my own. And so I ended up working alongside Mahting's brother Giannis, and Mahting worked with us for a while over there. And really, it was like a really amazing educational experience for someone who was not only a new hunter, but new in the world of communications. I've always been a writer. I've always loved language in general, but really working there was, this baseline for understanding how do we communicate stories, how do we tell the story of hunting and fishing responsibly, what does it mean to talk about conservation to a group of people that don't understand it, and thinking about those perspectives as someone who didn't come from that space gave me a lot of elasticity in it, I guess. So I ended up going from meat eater to working at BHA, doing social media, BHA, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, public lands advocacy group based in Montana. Did social media and online advocacy for them, which was another great place to learn, really got into the policy side of things there. And then I've been on my own really since February of 2018. Picked up contract work. Mahting and I actually worked together. I did social media for Hunt to Eat while I was still doing social media for BHA, and was on the road for a while. Just I really wanted a chance to get out onto public lands and experience some of these places that I'd been working so hard to conserve. I got to spend some time in Grand Staircase, Escalante, did some backpacking out there, went to 17 national parks, just kind of lived in my Jeep with my dog and got to see a lot of country, and then ended up getting in with Gear Junkie, and it's kind of been like the perfect marriage for me in a way. Like it's I have a lot of space and long reign to do and talk about whatever I want, which I do, and I also get to work with brands and understand what's going on in the world of outdoor rec and in hunting, and I couldn't have ended up in a better place with better people. So
did
really
you
lucky.
Did you hashtag Jeep life when you were doing that?
I did not.
No.
I don't know if people would be impressed with my Jeep.
Okay.
2006. Well, so I just recently upgraded to a 2013 Chevy Silverado.
Okay.
Because I've got to haul my horses around.
Yeah.
And
that's right, you're a horseman.
Yeah. And my Jeep had a V8 5.3 liter, but I can't. You need more wheelbase for a trailer.
Right.
So.
Right. Well,
I just sold my Jeep last week and got a new truck.
Nice.
So,
well, congratulations on your new truck.
Thanks.
In your story of coming into hunting, I think it's why I was happy to get you two on the same podcast together. And of course, when you guys walked in the room, I asked if you knew each other. I didn't even realize you had such an extensive history.
It's funny.
But your story of coming into hunting as an adult and deliberately starting, I think. Some folks, at least like in the rural area where I'm from in northern Michigan, like people probably couldn't tell you like when they decided to become a hunter. A lot of people just like, you grew up and you did it because your dad did it or your mom did it or something like that. And you making the conscious decision to become a hunter really kind of ties in with the same type of ethos that I think Hunt to Eat embodies, of bringing in a younger generation who's deliberately choosing to hunt based on the health value of the venison or the wild game that they're getting. Was that a similar story for you, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because I say I'm a late onset hunter, and I'm like, it seems like it's just yesterday that I started hunting. It turns out now that this will be my, I think, 10th season as a hunter, which is just makes me feel old. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a hunting family. Obviously, my brother is like the perfect. He was the perfect mentor because he actually did it growing up. I just went along for the ride, and then right at the moment that I would become a hunter, I decided to mostly give my dad the finger as a 12-year-old. So that just that's how life goes. But so then I kind of came back to it right at 24 years old. Decided that I was going to start hunting. So. But yeah, I mean, I was very deliberate about. I finally settled down in Colorado. I kind of understood I had a sense of place. Decided that was like the jumping off point for being what I thought was it was okay for me to start taking life from a place now that I had settled into it and knew it a little bit, and lucked out. And then I had like the best hunting mentor anybody could ask for. There's few people that can keep up with my brother and his skill set. So,
He took me on my first hunt.
I know.
Really?
Yeah, he took me on my first hunt.
Yeah.
So he's been a mentor for both of you.
Yeah.
then.
Big time, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Well, and it's like I sat 6 feet away from him, and so I feel like I owe Yanni like a constant apology because I think he saw me through, every question that a beginning hunter could ask, someone who's advanced. I had a really hard kill on my first deer that really went the wrong way. And I think I sat in Giannis's truck with him for like an hour and a half crying. And he really set my heart at ease on that one. And yeah, he's been with me through some hard moments. And
I feel like I
I've
should
always
just
appreciated
give him
it.
an introduction since we're talking.
Yeah,
about
that's
him
true.
so
Okay.
much.
Yeah.
His name's Giannis Putelis. He is the older but not as good-looking brother, Putelis brothers, known as the Latvian Eagle from the Meat Eater podcast and TV show. He's an executive producer there. Anyway, if you didn't know who
And now
he was,
he's like on the Home and Garden network or something, right?
I don't know. No. He's still jumping around Montana doing cool things.
Yeah.
Being a turkey whisperer. Anyway, yeah, he was an amazing mentor. His background as a guide made him an amazing educator.
Yeah.
He's been that way, our whole growing up. And so I think that being a good educator makes you a good mentor to new hunters and kind of understanding that, that beginner's mindset. So yeah, like when I killed my first elk on my first elk hunt, he was right there guiding me through it. And when the tears started, bawling out of my face after those 3 shots, it was like, he was there being a good older brother and being a good mentor and just working me through it,
Yeah.
So I definitely owe him a debt of gratitude for that, for sure. But yeah, so that played into kind of hunt to eat for sure. I mean, for the first 3 years, it's funny to look back at it now, but I spent probably only 10 days a year hunting elk. Like that's all the hunting I did. Like I don't fish. Like I hunted elk for a week a year. I sighted my gun in the week before,
Yep.
and I filled my freezer with an elk for 3 years straight, and that was it. Like that's all I needed. It wasn't until we kind of took on hunt to eat and started looking at what else is involved and working for Meat Eater and seeing, hunting around the globe essentially, that I kind of leapt into, okay, let's go hunt a lot of different cool stuff in a lot of different places. I love exploring new places and running around. So yeah.
You've both expressed through your stories of your first hunts a certain level of remorse for the animal that you took, and I think for a lot of people who maybe didn't grow up with hunting as a given, that's something that maybe they struggle with, or people that don't hunt but view hunting through a certain lens. Maybe they have trouble getting over that remorseful aspect, and why I think the message of hunting to eat is so important right now. How did you guys, and I say guys, but how did
Listen, I'm a guy. Just include
cool,
me
cool.
in the guys. I'm not a
and realize I'm just a little bit timid about saying
I
that.
call everybody guy.
Right,
Yeah,
because and we'll talk about
Guys is
Nicole's
inclusive
recent
term.
blog
Oh, God.
soon, but you'll know why. But either way, how did you get over that remorseful aspect, and how did you square that with the activity you were doing and what you were getting out of it?
Okay, I'll go.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I don't think I don't know that there is a squaring or a getting rid of. Like it's part of the game, it's part of the process. I think that, and this goes kind of to where hunt to eat, talk about the next 10 years of where we go. This is part of that. It's, call it social justice, call it like just transforming our like larger culture so my wife is a geriatric doctor, so we deal with death and dying on a daily basis. Like all of her patients are 80, 90 years old, It's a constant conversation in our house that people die. That is not a constant conversation for most Americans.
Yeah.
We take our old people and we put them in a building with a bunch of other old people. We close the door, nobody sees it, and all of a sudden you have a whole generation or multiple generations now of people that don't have an experience with death and dying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the process is hidden from us, and that, I think, there's a direct correlation between that process being hidden from us to not understanding where our food comes from, and that in gathering our food, there is a dying process and a death process that happens that we're not comfortable with. So my goal at some point is to get Hunt to Eat to a point where we're talking about death and dying in that like larger context of, we need to look at how we structure our culture and how we like what we do with our grandparents, and the fact that we don't have grandparents in the home, and there's so much to that. But so yeah, hunting's a great place to reconnect to, this is what happens when I pull the trigger. This thing is gonna die, and hopefully it dies in the fastest, most ethical way, and be there for the process. Like, be engaged in. I always say that my first elk that's like the closest I've ever been to God. Is
Totally.
That energy leaving that being is, in my sense, like talking about God, and so, like, that's super powerful. It's one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had in my life, is to be there when that happens. And most people don't have that experience anymore, that's taking away a lot from people when you like don't have that. So I think I want everyone to experience it, right? When people are like, I don't know if I could ever do it. It's like, well, boy, do I want you to do it once. And after that, if you can tell me that you're not into that, cool, by all means. But, at least have the opportunity to experience it, because most people haven't. So
I think it's like, that's the first time I've ever heard anyone go directly into like death and dying on like a holistic level when asked that question. And for me, like, hunting has really been a way to address like death, dying, and grief. Like, I lost my dad to cancer 20 years ago this year. And so mortality has been something that's like always been very, very tangible to me. And I think that like part of the reason that hunting in particular has been very important to me is that it's a spiritual way to understand death, to let go of a lot of the fear around death, to let go of the anxiety around death, and understand that like we're all a part of something that is continuous. So every year I try to, the past 2 years I've killed three deer. The first one, like I said, didn't go down well. The last two I've been hunting by myself and killed both of them with one shot. And those two experiences are the most connected that I've like felt to this planet, really. And to explain like why I go alone is like I like to give myself the space to either like, feel emotional. I mean, my 2017 deer, I was so grateful that I didn't cry. Like, I was so grateful that I didn't cry. So like I had like a tear, but like when I got up to the deer, I was just like, thank God, like this went exactly how I wanted it to go. So it was a really interesting experience because I expected myself to cry. And then I took another shot on my next deer, and like the best shot that I've taken, and that like knocked the wind out of me. So I think it's really interesting to like be in that place, and to be with that animal, and to understand that like that energy is continuing in different forms. And I think that what happens when people are hunting traditionally, they're brought up into like a culture. And if you look at like human development and the way that the brain grows and changes, I mean, technically we don't have a true like space for empathy until we're in our mid-20s. So, I think that it makes sense that when adult hunters come to hunting, they're having a very different experience because there isn't an underwriting of an experience that happened when we were children. So I think that like it's, the children are naturally cruel. Like, and a lot of people aren't okay saying that, I worked with kids for a long time, and it's not their fault. Like, it's just a part of like the way that we grow and change.
Like the curiosity and testing out what this world is about.
Yeah, I mean, I remember dissecting a frog that was alive and like watching its heartbeat in its chest, you know? Like, I wouldn't do that today, but as a child, you're so overwhelmed with curiosity, you don't have a lot of empathy, like, and all you want to do is look to the people around you that are mentoring you. So like, if you're looking and seeing your dad go out and kill, you know, a 300-inch bull elk, and like for him, like that's like something that he's always wanted to do, then you're going to think, this is part of what's going to make me an adult and make me like my dad.
Like, it's just what you do.
Yeah, it's just what you do. So I think that you know, people always talk about all those different stages of hunting for the traditional hunter. I think that when you come into it as an adult, I mean, I didn't shoot a gun until I was 31 years old. You know, when you come into it that late in life, like, you've already developed a lot of, you know, a lot of the things that like actually give you a greater, I don't want to say greater capacity, because it doesn't mean that traditional hunters can't feel the same way that I felt, but it gives you almost an advantage to come in and understand that there is a life at the end of your gun and at the end of your arrow, and, you know, and to pay credence to that. And, you know, part of that is being closer to your own mortality, right?
You know, I guess I kind of feel like I had both the traditional outdoor upbringing, but also a little bit of the coming to it as an adult, because I hunted, you know, small game, and then, you know, when you're in Michigan, at least back in the 90s, you could start hunting deer at 14. So I hunted when I was 14 and 15. But then, you know, sports, college, girls, you go away from it. And then I came back to it in college to travel to deer camp on Beaver Island, which is out in the middle of Lake Michigan, to a deer camp that my grandpa had started. My grandpa had moved back to Michigan from Wyoming, and it was a chance to spend time with him. And I killed my first deer then. It was a doe, and I had that meat like for the rest of the year at college. Like, that was like my lunches, like every day almost.
I know. I wish I had hunting when I was in college, because I was a poor college student eating quesadillas like every single day. but at the time, that wasn't, that became the result of it. But the reason that I did it is I wanted to be like my grandpa. I wanted to be like my dad. Yeah.
It was something, it was like a family
There's
tradition.
sentimentality to it.
Yeah. And I was so proud of getting my first deer. I think that was the second to last time he was able to make it to deer camp, you know, with him. So it was much more of a family, as you mentioned, trying to follow in the family tradition. And it wasn't until later, I think, when I started focusing more on kind of fitness and eating healthy, that I really saw the value, not just of hunting as an activity, but as a way to provide healthy food.
Yeah.
And once I started trying to eat, because before I tried to eat healthy, it was just like I didn't care. Like, I was eating terrible stuff, like fried, you know. But when you start thinking about what you actually put on your plate, and then you realize that if you're going to put meat on your plate, wild game is one of the healthiest things that you can put on your plate, and it comes through this activity that I've been trying to do for years anyways. It kind of made sense. And that was about the time that you came out with Hunt to Eat. It seems like there's this movement within hunting, and it coincides with, I don't like the term, because I think it the hipster hunter type of thing. I don't like the term because I think it just like pigeonholes people. But I mean, that's a type of trend that you hear about or read about. It seems like this all coalesced about that time that you were starting that too. And
I think it like combined with the locavore movement and
Yeah.
food in general.
Yeah.
And like, you know, there was like Food Inc. and all these big documentaries that came out probably like 10 years ago.
Right.
You know, as Netflix started like getting
Yeah.
on the rise. And I think that like people are like, whoa, like this is where my food is coming from. I remember watching Food Inc. It's probably when I was still living in like Boulder or Denver, and just like crying when they had this scene of the pigs, you know, where they're shocking the pigs essentially. And it's like really unbelievable footage. So I think that like people were really moved to start understanding where their food was coming from, right? Like we went from this like crazy switch in the 50s, like post-war 50s, where we went from, you know, farms and having our own meat to canning process and like I mean, if you go back into recipes, even from like the 50s, 60s, 70s, like it's like gelatin meat molds. Like it was like food. The future of food was process.
Yeah.
And so like now we're like, wait, this hasn't helped anyone. Like, what do we go back to? Like, let's look at these processes. Like, how do we make them better? So I think there's like this bigger thing going on in the social consciousness, and then like we come back around to this idea, okay, like, wow, we've been maintaining all of this wildlife for the past 100 years. And we have this resource, of, fresh, organic, lean meat. And people are transitioning back to, what's more natural. If death is going to be on my plate, how do I want it to look? And I think that, like, that is a giant cultural switch that has happened really thanks to like documentary work and the type of stories that people are putting out there about the food industry at large. It becomes easier to talk about hunting to people when you can connect it back to what's going on in industrial farming.
And when we talk about what we're actually putting on our plate, I think that's a good way to transition to kind of the main topic for this podcast, which is hunting with non-lead ammunition. And this is something that the National Wildlife Federation has had policy to support for a while. And for folks that don't know, the way that the National Wildlife Federation sets its policy is that we're composed of 51 state and territorial affiliates. About half of those affiliates represent hunters and anglers in their state. The other half represent kind of more environmental or Audubon interests in their state. And when those two sides can agree, that becomes our national policy that we advocate for at the national level. Some of our national policies are legislative in focus, and it means that we try to pass a bill or something like that, but some of them are educational as well. And we had history in helping to further the lead shot restriction on waterfowl hunting that's been in place since 1991. But now we follow the policies that our affiliates have adopted to promote the use of non-lead hunting ammunition and fishing tackle for its impacts to wildlife. For instance, when an eagle scavenges a gut pile that includes lead shot, it can get poisoned. Similarly with lead fishing tackle, if a loon sometimes mistakes sinkers that have fallen off a line for little pebbles, and they chew those in their gullet, and they can get poisoned from that as well. So that's why the National Wildlife Federation got into this. It's because of our mission to conserve and protect wildlife while also supporting hunting, which we have done since our founding by a duck hunter, Ding Darling, in 1936. But I think where it really has a great tie-in, and why I'm excited that we have this new partnership with Hunt to Eat, is because of what we're putting on our plate. Because lead shot can get in and particles can get out, and obviously you don't want to feed our families meat that has lead particles in it. Mahting, you've, I know, promoted non-lead through other partnerships on Hunt to Eat. Have you always hunted with non-lead, or is that something that you've recently adopted?
Yeah, no, I've thanks to my brother who set me up with all my hunting gear when I first started. We've been shooting copper bullets for 9 years now. Okay. Yeah, it's and in 9 years they've dropped 7 elk. So the other 2 years were just they never took a shot. But yeah, plenty of elk have gone down and successfully without issue, thanks to copper bullets. So all of this stuff. You mentioned a previous collaboration that we did with the non-lead partnership. Those guys do lots of ballistic testing and demonstration, and like the proof is in the pudding, or the proof is in the gelatinous things that they shoot at and capture all of the information in, and copper bullets work just as well these days to as does everything else. So might as well just use it. They're a little bit more expensive, but given what we spend in gear everywhere else, using that slightly more expensive bullet is like it's a drop in the
Yeah.
bucket. So, yeah.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the North American Non-Lead Partnership. They do such great work. I haven't met those guys personally, but I've been following the information. It's great information that they put out on the ballistics
Yeah.
of lead versus non-lead ammunition. And what we actually just released earlier today was then also a partnership between National Wildlife Federation
Yep.
and Hunt to Eat, what we call the Hunt Clean initiative. And I want people to go to hunttoeat.com and check out the t-shirt, because Mahting and his team put together a fantastic design. We talk about copper bullets, sometimes we talk about waterfowl, but especially this design focuses on upland. And upland, I think, is a great growth area for non-lead, because it's a place where we're putting a lot of shot out into the field. You know, the whole pattern of a shotgun is if you're taking a shot at a grouse, not all of them are going to hit it. The rest of it remains in the environment. And promoting, whether it's steel shot or bismuth or tungsten, for those type of applications is something that can really reduce, if it gets more widespread, really reduce the amount of lead that we're putting into the environment that's getting into non-target wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
So go to hunttoeat.com and check out the Hunt Clean collaboration with the National Wildlife Federation. That design is just so cool, the way that it lays out with the field. How did that come about?
Well, so the design process started, actually, it was a little bit of like, should we do fishing or should we do upland? And then we chose upland. So the design is actually intended to kind of be seen as two different scapes, essentially, of two different upland hunters hunting two different bird species. And then ultimately, if you look at like the tie-in to the non-lead or the Hunt Clean, is that in all of the understory, there's a bunch of songbirds kind of nestled in the understory and in the wildflowers that you would be hunting over. So whether that's sunflowers for doves or other stuff, but so that's kind of giving you the sense that, you know, where that shot goes is to where those other animals are living. So ultimately, where we as a company want to be like whole systems thinking. We want to have the ecology of all this stuff in mind. And so it's kind of like whether you're talking about death and dying and the ecology of kind of the human existence, or just the ecology of knowing that we affect more than just the game birds that we're after, but we affect the other birds that are out there hanging around, which, you know, honestly, like, I love turkey hunting, but a meadowlark's call, you know, it's my favorite thing out in the woods or just outside. And I don't want to endanger those things as I go about my hunting business. So, yeah.
That's like I feel like we forget a lot in the hunting you know, it's like the rest of, which is kind of good, because like the non-hunting community cares about, you know, non-game species for the, you know, I guess for some of them. But I've always loved birds, and especially raptors. And we recently had a bald eagle in Glacier Park test positive for lead poisoning. So I think that I've heard a lot of controversy around lead and how it might affect us within our diets, but I think it's really important to consider, you know, the other animals that it's affecting. And for me, like, birds they're like the bringer of the seasons, you know. When I see a bluebird, I know that Montana spring will finally come eventually. You know, and being able to see the pelicans come back and, you know, seeing bald eagles every day. I mean, you think about bald eagles, and like every time I look at the bald eagle, I think about the Endangered Species Act, you know, and how this bird has come back because we protected it. And I think the idea of using non-lead as a protective measure, to me, just feels like the right decision.
And I'm glad you mentioned bald eagles, because I think there seems to be an undercurrent of an argument saying that because bald eagles are recovered and they're an absolute success story of the Endangered Species Act, because they're recovered and their populations are doing well, that maybe we don't have to do things like use non-lead to avoid poisoning them. And to me, that's ridiculous. Like, to me, because they're doing well, what we're actually seeing is increasing populations, which increases the potential for bald eagles to come in contact with gut piles and, spent lead shells. So we're actually, with them being recovered and doing well as a species, we actually have increased the odds that they may come into contact with spent lead shot. And to me, that's an argument for, if you haven't done it already, switching to non-lead shot, because where you might not have had to worry about maybe an eagle being in your area when their populations were struggling. Well, now they might be in your area, and you might poison an eagle inadvertently by doing that. And Aaron Kindle, who I work with at the National Wildlife Federation, he's our senior manager for Western sporting campaigns. He's made the point, and so I'm going to steal it and use it here. When we think about our actions as ethical hunters, and a lot of people who have read Jim Pozowitz's book, Beyond Fair Chase, we think about the hunting ethics and maybe when we take a shot. And if there are two elk or two deer standing next to each other, and the one that we want to target is in front of the other, but we also know that if we were to miss, we may inadvertently hit the one behind it. Yeah. As an ethical hunter, one of the first things we learn is you don't take that shot. You don't take that shot that, should you miss, may inadvertently harm a non-target animal. You make sure you know what's behind it, what's beyond your target, to make sure there's a good backstop, it's not going to harm anything. And I think that's something that when we talk about bald eagles or other raptors, even when they're doing well as a species, as a population, even on the individual level of a single bald eagle, that's beyond that shot we may take. So if we're applying that same concept of hunting fair chase and hunting ethics, where you don't take a shot that's going to harm a non-target wildlife, when we are using lead, I think we also have to consider not just what's behind it spatially, but what's behind it in time. That an eagle may come down and eat that gut pile, or come into contact with, maybe you shot a grouse and a pellet got into it but it didn't kill it, and that gets predated by an eagle later on in time. That eagle now has become that non-target wildlife that's the same as maybe that deer standing behind the one that you've got your sights on. And if we apply that same way as an ethical hunter, we want to make sure that we're not taking a shot that's going to kill anything beyond that one single animal that we intend to put on our plate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah.
So, Nicole, have you always used non-lead, or is that a recent adoption?
No, it's recent. I mean, I think that there's so many overwhelming things when you're coming into hunting.
Yeah.
I still consider myself a newer hunter. Absolutely. I'm definitely a newer angler, and so I also know that my place within communications is talking about that.
Yeah.
And there's so much information when you're learning about guns and gun safety and all of these things that non-lead didn't play into it until recently. So I think that it really wasn't until probably the past year or so that I really started thinking about it seriously. But I mean, like anything in education is an ongoing game, right? So,
right.
But it's definitely something that is important to me, and I think that I recently started hunting waterfowl. Last year was my first year hunting waterfowl, and that's an area where I definitely want to make sure that I'm not only doing the right thing, but the ethical thing.
And with waterfowl, the legal thing.
The legal thing. Sorry. But I mean, it is interesting to think about it in contrast to big game. So, it's been a fun learning experience, and one that I think can translate, and one that I need to continue educating myself on.
Well, and I hate to admit it, but I'm a recent convert as well. I actually didn't start using non-lead till I came to work for the National Wildlife Federation, started reading up on our past policies, and then seeing all the reasons why we passed those policies. And so, I'm a recent convert too, and I think that there's no blame and there's no accusation when we encourage hunters to voluntarily adopt non-lead. We're not calling you out for not having already done it, because so many of us hunters, especially folks that like me, just grew up doing it, and you use the same caliber, the same type of ammunition. Like I hunt with my 30-06 that my grandpa passed down to my dad, that he passed down to me, and I had used the same ammunition, the same brand, the same type, because that's just what I grew up with. That's what went in that firearm. Yeah. And it wasn't until I switched after I learned about those things. And it's okay if you haven't done it yet. Like, understand, when we're saying we're encouraging you to adopt non-lead ammunition, we're not calling you out for not having already done it, because it takes that education, it takes that learning about it and hearing about it for you to know why you should. But here's the thing. If you're listening to this podcast, now you've heard about it. All right, so you can no longer claim that you didn't know anymore, because you've gotten to this point listening to us.
So don't shoot the bald eagle behind your deer.
Right. And you can find more information about this at nwf.org/lead-free landscapes. You can also find that link at nwf.org/outdoors. And you can also learn about it really just through the great imagery, and purchase a t-shirt at hunttoeat.com. And here's another great thing. With the t-shirt sale, Mahting is actually donating 15% of the proceeds of that sale back to us at National Wildlife Federation to help with this education campaign. And that's really, really terrific. At Mahting, I can't let us end the podcast without talking about the fact that your company is a member of 2% for conservation, which means that your company supports conservation efforts. Could you tell me a little bit about how you do that, not just with the Hunt Clean T-shirt, but with your company as a whole?
Yeah, it honestly just comes down to the fact that without wild places and wild animals, I don't have a company, right? Like, I'm not going to make t-shirts about extinct deer and elk and be like, oh, this is a cool t-shirt, right? Without those things, I don't have a company. And so if I don't actively, even as a for-profit company, put a lot of time and effort back into saving those places, then, like, that's not cool. I'm not going to call people out, but I think you got to put your money where your mouth is, right? You got to put your money back to the resource that's giving this whole company life. So yes, we're part of 2% for conservation. So we put a percent of our time and a percent of our profits. But honestly, we put about a percent of our gross sales. So like 10% of our profits actually go back.
Okay.
This year it might be even a little bit more than that.
But you guys support a wide swath,
right?
Yeah,
groups.
I mean, there's we've kind of gotten a little bit. We're not pigeonholed in that. Like, it's a place I want to be, but we, from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers to Wild Sheep Foundation to Quail and Pheasant Forever to you guys to the Non-Lead Partnership. I mean, the list goes on of people that we want to give the cool t-shirt that actually helps tell the story for all of these conservation groups, because they're doing the good work, right? Like, everyone's trying to do that good work. And as Jared Frazier from 2% says, conservation is not a competition. Like, we're in this game together to keep it all going, right? Like, we all want to go hunt whatever that your favorite thing is, right? And that takes all of us doing this work. So I appreciate the support, and we're going to keep giving back to people who are doing good work.
We really appreciate the support that we get from that, and I do have to just make so it's clear, not like behind the scenes, that I'm a regional committee member for 2% for conservation. So
nice.
while I'm plugging them, I just want to make sure that that's not.
I am
like,
also a part of 2%.
That's great.
Yeah.
Jared does great work. And Nicole, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is your writing with Gear Junkie.
Yeah.
And Gear Junkie is such a cool place to talk about non-lead, because you write about hunting and fishing gear, and we are very deliberately encouraging people to use non-lead hunting and fishing gear.
Yeah.
How is that going? You have such a unique voice and a platform through that outlet. you recently had a blog post that got shared widely, and I've struggled with whether...
I like to call them articles.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just kidding.
Right, so you had an article... got shared widely. And I'll be honest, I struggled with whether or not to bring this up because the content of the article was actually, don't talk about these 5 things. And so I don't know if I should have brought up the article saying not to talk about these 5 things, because in doing so, I would be talking about those 5 things.
I know. It put people in a little bit of a corner. But that definitely wasn't my intention. I think I'm like... I don't want to have to be like an activist for women, you know, like I do. Yeah. Thank you. But the problem is that like, it's hard to get beyond a lot of the conversations that are going on right now to talk about things that are more substantial to women. And what I hear a lot in this industry is either men talking about women, like when it comes to these particular topics, and I think that actually a big thing that's come up that's forcing this over and over again is state after state bringing Blaze Pink, back into the conversation, and so I think it keeps getting top of mind, like with each state that puts it out there. There's another wave of outrage or another raid, or and then the opposite wave of people saying, well, I don't really care. And to me, it's just it's silly. I think that like when we're talking about women, I think that like unfortunately the Blaze Pink conversation ends up just focusing women into one side of the conversation, right? And then we all have the same conversation about it over and over again. And I mean the other pieces of those conversations do the same thing. I mean, we talked about crying. Like you cried when you killed your elk. I think that crying is not a gendered conversation. And I think that needs to end like immediately. And I also
and I will freely admit I cried when I killed that first doe when I was 20.
Well, yeah, I think that like when you're new,
and I cried when my grandfather just died.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, because that's like part of the human experience. It's part of death. Just get real with it. It's okay, right?
Well, I think that honestly, if you're cool as a cucumber about something dying and like throwing a big party, like I think that you're missing part of the point. So like, I hate to like.
We call them sociopaths.
Well,
Kidding, but.
I think that like, I understand why the public gets outraged when they see certain things, and it's, and a lot of it goes back to reverence and respect. And so, I don't know, we're getting a little sidetracked, but essentially, it's okay to talk about the article. I think that the reality is that if we're not having the conversation, then it can't move forward, right? So like, women are just as deep and diverse and different as men in hunting. We each have our own experiences. I feel like it's stupid to say it, but every time I go into a podcast, I don't want to have to answer the question hunter or huntress. Every time I listen to men talking about women, I don't want to hear them talking about pink or crying. I want, like, there are so many women doing good things, and the majority of them aren't drawing attention to themselves. They're just out there learning how to hunt. I think the contempt that I've heard recently for women's spaces is alarming, and the fact that people feel the need to denigrate women's only spaces is alarming. In a world full of men, gendered spaces is how women find each other, and I believe that gendered spaces are necessary for everybody. I worked at an all-girls summer camp, and there was an all-boys summer camp across the lake, and both the gendered and the co-ed spaces were equally important. And I think that it I'm not necessarily like offended. I understand why people want to point fingers. They feel like they're being blamed for something that they didn't do, and I think that gets back to like apologizing and not apologizing for not including women. It's just, I don't think that's a conversation that's necessarily necessary. I also don't want to have to feel like I have to kowtow like every time that I'm at the table with someone, like just to have a seat at the table isn't enough if the conversation isn't, equal. So, and I've heard that a lot, women that I've heard on different podcasts, or I don't know, now I'm rambling, but it's difficult to have to listen to women get put into a difficult situation over and over again and hear that like we always have to be above the board, like we're always taking the high road, and especially in those gendered spaces where we don't want to be excluded because we say the wrong thing. So it's still a catch-22 when you're in a world of 90% men. And I love to hear you guys like this is an inclusive conversation. So like don't feel like I don't want to dominate it. Like I'm curious, I sent that particular article out to a wide group of women. And in retrospect, maybe I should have sent it out to a couple of men too. But I was like, I don't want to speak for everybody. What do you guys think? And like across the board, they all felt the exact same way. And these are women in the industry that hold a lot of power. So
well, and one of them was Marsha Brownlee, who's our director for the Artemis Sportswoman program. She was actually one of our first podcast guests that we recorded at the annual meeting last year.
Oh, nice.
So you can
check
also
out, support them by buying a Artemis shirt for Hunt to Eat.
That's right. That's right. And that's one of those spaces. And you make a great point when we talk about spaces that are specific to really any particular demographic. They're not set up to exclude anybody. They're generally set up to have a space for a part of our population that has historically already been excluded, and making sure that they're specifically included.
Yeah.
It seems like, and I didn't know whether to dive into that today, because like I just want to talk to you as Nicole Quartieri, a hunter who now uses non-lead. Like,
well, I mean, it's still an important conversation, and I think like the biggest thing that I keep coming back to, and even at Gear Junkie, like I'm one of the few women editors there, and I'm one of the few women editors in the hunting and fishing space. So like when I think about like what my responsibility is, it feels a lot bigger than it needs to, and that's like a weird thing to have to wrestle with. I guess the article that made the first big splash was when I took Kuyu on, when they really did a disservice in the way they were marketing to women and to the men who were supposedly buying that gear. So. I don't want to have to be that person, but then when I get like messages from like other girlfriends in this industry, they're like, I can't write this, because it's not going to get through the publishing ranks of hunting and fishing magazines or publications. So like there are a lot of women in this industry that are just quiet, and I have a setup where I don't have to be. Like my editor is always pushing me to go further, and he's like, like he I like to say that he's my favorite mansplainer, because like he'll edit edit my writing, and
that's another thing I never knew before I came to NW.
Oh my god, it's so funny. Well, with us it's a joke, because he's just such a phenomenal, his name's Sean McCoy, but he's just such a phenomenal editor, so it's really fun to work with someone who like supports your voice and helps you make it better. And I guess everything that it kind of comes back to is like inclusion over diversity, just talking to people over making them a token, no one woman can speak for women in hunting, just as like no minority can speak for all minorities. So I think like if we get back to this idea that, each individual is a depth of their own knowledge, then like we become more inclusive by default, I think you look at like the world of hunting evangelism right now, as I like to call it, and what you see is like, we need more African Americans, we need more Asians, we need more women, how do we get low income children in here? And it's like, hunting is not is not something that necessarily plays well to everybody. I think that you have to have a real intention to get into it. I think that making sure that people have the space to get into it if they want to is important, but I don't think that recruiting hunters is ever going to work because it's not focused on, the right motivation for hunting necessarily. Because what I always hear is that they want to continue tradition, and you can't continue tradition really unless you're passing it down in a way. And I don't feel like
you can't
a traditional
continue tradition in a community that doesn't have that.
Yeah,
tradition.
exactly. Thank
doesn't
you.
make any sense.
Yeah. But what you can do is educate people about why it's awesome to hunt to eat.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also have a lot of friends that I would never see them getting into hunting, and I would never, I'll have the conversation with them. I think that educating the public about hunting is way more important than hunting recruitment.
Right.
And I think that that's where we make a big mistake in thinking you can go to an elementary school and talk to all these kids, but if their parents aren't going to get them out hunting, they're not necessarily going to become hunters.
And I think poll data and public approval of hunting, I think, is often more important than actual hunting recruitment for continuing the actual tradition. And poll numbers show that out. Michigan a few years ago did a program called the Michigan Wildlife Council, and it's modeled on Colorado's Hug a Hunter program. Mm-hmm. And what they did with their baseline polling data is that public approval for hunting, when it's done for the meat, is very high. When it's perceived as done for ego or trophy, that approval is very low. And there's conservation funding issues that I think go way beyond just hunter recruitment that need to be fixed, like with the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. But hunting to eat and that food value of wildlife, like what Shane Mahoney is doing with Conservation Visions and the Wild Harvest Initiative, seems to be really where the conversation is going, and probably where it needs to go to. And Mahting, you really helped spur that with Hunt to Eat, and Nicole, you've done a tremendous job of writing about that in the various places that you've written about it. So I really appreciate both of you coming on to the National Wildlife Federation Outdoors podcast. We've talked about going to hunteat.com. Nicole, how can people find your writings?
Just come to gearjunkie.com, and if you want to look up hunt and fish specifically, just to go through the topics. And I write about a lot of other things in addition to hunting and fishing. But we have a lot of great content, whether it's gear reviews or, helping make sure that you're getting your dog out hiking safely. I mean, we cover the gamut. It's a lot of fun.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for being on. The National Wildlife Federation podcast is supported by Rep Your Water, another company that does pretty cool gear for fishing through a partnership with our Great Lakes office that supports our work to stop Asian carp. We appreciate that support. We appreciate the support from Hunt to Eat. Thank you both for being on the National Wildlife Federation podcast. I'm your host, Drew Youngbeck.
Booyah.